This is an endurance feat, right? We're doing our own psychological experiment. How long can you go? All right. Last big session before we do the awards and close out. So I know none of you are here to see our next guest. It's just you're waiting for the next part, right, where we announce the posters. So I actually got to read some of this, and I'll tell you why in a second. Because like the last one, I try not to, but sometimes I'm out of bandwidth. I think you can sympathize.
I'll stand so that you're not standing by yourself.
We're going to do chutes and ladders before decide who went up on the stream. So this is our next guest, Dr. Serena Chancellor. She is the physician astronaut that you heard about the other day from JD. Serena's also a good friend of mine, so I have to read it because then I'll say things you're probably not supposed to know. So Dr. Anand was selected by NASA in 2009. She is board certified in internal and aerospace medicine and recently served as a flight engineer on the International Space Station for expeditions 56 and 57. During her time on orbit, the crews contributed to hundreds of experiments in biology, biotechnology, physical science, and earth science aboard the ISS. The investigations were led into new cancer treatment methods and algae growth in space. So there's a lot of cases work, not just HRP, not just space biology. The crew also installed a new life sciences glove box, which is where they get a lot of their work done, a sealed work area for life science and technology investigations that can accommodate 2 astronauts. So you get 4 hands in there working at the same time. Serena's first flight, she logged 197 days in space, and she currently now covers medical issues and on-orbit support for the astronaut office. A couple things about her background. She considers Fort Collins her home. Her education, graduated from, is it Poudre? Poudre. I didn't want to say that. Okay. Poudre. Poudre High School in Fort Collins, Colorado in 1993. Received her Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. in 97. Doctorate of Medicine from the University of Texas, Hook'em Horns. And this is from an Aggie, by the way. All right, can you imagine that? She completed a 3-year residency in internal medicine at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, and then completed an additional year as the chief resident in internal medicine in 2005. She also completed the aerospace medicine residency and Master of Public Health in 2007 and is board certified in internal and aerospace medicine. Extensive career experience. She was an active flight surgeon before being selected, took care of shuttle crew, worked in the exploration office, and worked actually a lot of health issues even on the research side. We were introduced probably in 2005-ish by a colleague you may have heard of, Dr. Jeff Davis. And he's responsible for all the trouble we might get in from thereafter, for sure.
And still will.
So on a personal note, I have nothing but the deepest respect and admiration for this woman. For her, being a physician really does come first. The extent of her volunteerism and providing medical services to the underserved is unprecedented. She rearranges her schedule, will drive wherever she has to drive. I tried to keep up with her. She's working in the St. Vincent's Clinic, and it has just been an amazing experience to see someone who has the level of skill she does in so many areas, but the heart that it takes to go work in those areas and endure the fact that she cannot always provide the service she wants, and trying to figure out and be an advocate for these folks who can't get the medical care they currently need, but figure out a way that they could possibly receive it. So she truly is a champion in that regard. That simultaneously goes a long way to her understanding the resource constraints associated with spaceflight, specifically spaceflight exploration constraints. So let's welcome Dr. Serena Chancellor to the stage and interview her.
Well, thank you for having me here. I think, so they're going to show a movie. It's about 10 minutes long. It just shows a lot of science on station. There's no sound. I'm going to narrate you through it. And then that movie's going to kind of continue to play in the background, and we'll start our interview. But I wanted you to get a feel for what it was like to do science on station. So we do start with a little bit of training, and we're just showing you some of the training that we do in our neutral buoyancy lab. This, honestly, was one of the most difficult parts of my training. Very physically demanding, 6 hours in a suit at one time. You get about 20 ounces of water per run, so you have to make that water last. And you spend hundreds of hours in the pool getting ready to do spacewalks on orbit. And you really feel like T-Rex because you're just operating in this envelope here. Your legs don't do anything, and you're trying to keep your shoulders safe, and really that suit doesn't move very well with a human. It's all we have right now, but a tremendous research, kind of an operational need that we have to get a better suit for us to be able to operate on other planets. Finally, I'm here on station, and this is ARED that you guys have probably heard about. I don't know how many videos you've seen. I'm just doing deadlifts right now. It looks like a very dynamic, moving process, and it is. Food acceptability, another science experiment we all took part in. We tried to film as much of the crew eating together as possible on orbit. This was very important for us. Don't look at the dates on those condiments. We were excited here because HTV launched a whole bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables, and we just decided to throw them at each other. You see that candle in the middle of the table? It's a bright blue flashlight with Kapton tape on the end. That was our evening candle that we would eat around as family. So behaviorally, that was very important for us, and we lit that every evening. You see it there again in the middle of the table, and it looks silly and stupid, but to us it wasn't. To us, it was where we gathered. And we tried to eat together as often as possible while on board ISS. And yes, I played with my food like everybody else. You see Oleg Artemiev there in the turquoise shirt, Sergey to his right, and Ricky and Drew and Alex. These were our favorite evenings together. The veggie experiment, this is Alex filming with our 8K camera on orbit. And what I want to say about this, because this is a couple minutes worth of me working with plants and vegetables, and this was tremendous, behaviorally motivating, but we were able to document the science with the 8K camera because as a crew, we took the time to do so. And finally, towards the end of our increment, the program put that time in our schedule. They saw the value of giving another crew member the time to film what we're doing. So it's the only way we tell our story once we come back down. Otherwise, people have no idea what we're doing up there. Only the PI sees us doing this science. So the 8K camera up there, it's a tremendous visual quality. And you can see these images right here. This really gives you a feel for what it's like to do these experiments on station. And so when we're up there and we're harvesting this dragoon lettuce and red Russian kale, that's what you're looking at right here, I got to save a little baggie for the crew. And so part of that is we finally got to have our first lettuce happy hour in space. We don't get the other happy hours, so we have vegetable happy hour, and we're happy to do it. We had a little tiny bottle of balsamic vinegar, and we'd kind of squirt that on the leaves, but this was amazing. I hadn't had a leafy green in months. So as often as you think we get fresh fruits and vegetables up there, it's not that often. Here I'm working in the glove box, the MSG. I spent a good number of weeks working on AngioX, and here I'm just doing a media exchange to keep those cells alive. What I learned is that if I work too close to that pane, a nice bubble of CO2 builds up, so I had to install a fan close to my work area because I started to get a headache 20 minutes into my experiments regularly. I loved working on this experiment, not just for the subject matter, but because I'm looking at the cells for the PI. The PI is telling me what parts of the cellular structure that she was looking for changes, and so I tried to help her find those best images. So I was highly vested and highly involved in this science. Crew members really like that. If you teach us what we're looking for, we can help better your science. So these are the plates that I would look at under the microscope. We'd house them in these little units called the biocell habitat. Of course, everything has Velcro because we have lost science up there. Thank goodness we found it. We just didn't tell you about it. But everything was attached to my pants most of the time because that's how we operate up there. And so these were the cells for AngioX. And then I'd put them back in their habitat after the media exchange was complete and after I'd looked at what structures had changed and taken images for the PI, and she received those immediately. And then I'd put them back in Sable, which is like our little oven for cells, and it just keeps them alive. I'm not looking at anything. That's just, I did that for show. because I never looked through the microscope directly. I always used the computer and projected the image, but it really looked good for the 8K cameras. That's why we did it. This was just a short video to show you the air fluid interface. So if you're trying to pull a medication out of a vial, on Earth, what do? We turn it upside down. You can't do that up there. This big bubble sits right in the middle. So this was Kool-Aid that I had injected into a vial just to play with this. And so I had to drag the needle, scrape the needle around the glass, and use surface tension in our favor to pull that fluid into the syringe itself. So even the way you administer medications, I use a centrifuge motion to get that fluid down to the end of that needle so it was ready for injection. So it was a lot of fun to play with these things up there. These are actual blood draws that we're doing. Alex and I were paired up frequently. It does take 2 people most of the time, although we are taught how to self-stick. Alex liked to inject, and then I would take the other end and fill up all the vials. And because up there, everything floats away. So on the ground, you can kind of rest the glass vials on the table. We can't do that up there, so you really need a lot of hands to help you. So we had a nice system down, and we were successful in 100% of our blood draws. And if we didn't get it on one arm, we moved to the next. So people are invested in that science. We understand how important it is to gather it. But we also filmed this with the 8K camera. We forced Drew Foystel to use it. And he did a really great job, actually, getting this footage for us. He was helping a little bit there. He's filming and helping. But we do all of our blood draws there in the Columbus segment because we have our setup that you can see to the right-hand side of the screen, all of our gloves, our gauze pads. So this says biochemical profile on the bottom, but what Alex and I are actually doing is we've got a Dragon that is docked to station, and we need to get all the science that's going to go back down on that vehicle. And it's sitting there in the Melfi, usually frozen at -80 or at differing temperatures, and we've got to gather it all and make sure we don't lose any. This is much more difficult than it looks because everything is in tiny little packets and tiny little test tubes, and it takes 4 hands to make sure we safely get all of that into those containers to get back down on Dragon. And we have forgotten science before, and we have lost science before. So imagine if we lose a few test tubes of blood draws. This has nothing to do with science. This is me showing you how to make a breakfast taco. I am not sure how that got in there, but I love that video. It was fantastic. This portion basically shows you how cluttered it is on board the ISS, especially in the US lab where we do a lot of our science. We're doing science on the ceiling, we're doing science on the walls, we're doing science upside down, and I've got to pull power bricks out of the way and wiring and get everything set up to do that. And at the same time, I'm trying to look back and forth at the procedure on a computer, so I really preferred using a tablet. We're all trained in ultrasound. The crew does a really good job performing ultrasound on themselves. So of course I'm looking at my eye here, and that's Drew, and I can only tell that's Drew because of those pants, and he wore those pants every single day of his mission. Alex and I worked on fluid shifts as well, so we were doing some imaging there of the jugular vein there on the left-hand side. People say you can use water on orbit. I much preferred gel. I thought you got better views, especially when taking movies. And this is some of the science behind that. So it's talking about how your blood flows when you're normally standing upright. When you lie down, those jugular veins do expand to be able to accommodate a larger percentage. But in microgravity, we are seeing stagnation and even reversal of that flow and even thrombus formation. So this is, of course, one of those newer findings that we weren't really looking for, and we just happened across it. And now we're trying to figure out the scientific basis behind it. Finally, fun. This was Halloween Day, and we decided to surprise MCC. So Alex had a Darth Vader costume flown all the way up to on orbit. I just made my costume from stuff on ISS, so I was a crazy scientist. I apologize for the equipment if that's yours. But it made a great part of the costume, and Sergei made the best Russian Elvis ever. And who flies a white spacesuit to station? Well, the Russians do. And so we did have a lot of fun up there together, and we took part in science together as well, and we always talked about that science together. Nothing we did was ever in a vacuum. The entire crew was always involved. I love the lightsaber. That was the best part. So it's, we often try and do this. We don't film it enough so that you folks do see what we do for our downtime on the ground, but we wanted to this time. So with that, that's just a short introduction to Science on Station. So thank you for watching.
Thanks, Serena, for sharing that with us. So I'm going to ask Serena a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So start thinking about what you might want to ask her. I mentioned in your introduction what an advocate you are for your patients, for sure. But recently, since you come back from station and you've been on the public affairs tour and with some of your new responsibilities, you become the voice and advocate for the science. It's really been a huge emphasis you've had. So from the interaction you've had, and you talked about it more like a non-technical group, trying to help them understand what we do and why. What do you think is the biggest thing we could do to help people understand the science we do, the implications it has, make it relevant to them, to continue to have the support that we have? We clearly have we always call it a really strong brand, but I think really continue to make that compelling reason why spaceflight matters and exploration will matter.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot, and I found that a lot of the places I give talks at, they're everywhere from universities to public schools, so all ages, all with a very different understanding of what we even do on ISS. And sometimes when I go to these places, I get asked how my trip to the moon was. Pause. So I realize at that point I've got to take a big step back and just talk about space in general and what our agency is doing. But then I always try and hone in on the science. So funny enough, when I first got up on orbit, I guess it's interesting, Alex and I had never talked about this before flying. We always talked about some of the more difficult aspects of training. But when we got up there, he felt that we should film as much science as possible. And not just, so we had tablets, and the tablets have a little camera, but those cameras aren't really of very good quality. And we've got a host of photographic equipment on ISS, but we also had the red camera, the 8K, and he said, we should make an effort as much as possible to try and tell a story that everybody can see. So that's half of it, right? Half of it is documenting it, which the program towards the end was extremely supportive with giving us that time to film everything we were doing. But the other part is telling the story. So Alex and I we floated, and we discussed about how best to tell a story, what would impact people. And what I found is that people, honestly, they think it's great that we do science on station, but until you make it personal to them, they don't care. There's a lot of things they have to worry about on a daily basis, how to feed their family, how their job is going, health problems they may have, health problems their family may have. And so unless you make your science personal to them, make it matter to them, they won't care. So I finally said, okay, we thought about it, and I said, let's tell a story to make it personal. So when we talked about AngioX for the first time, that's how I led off the story. Everybody knows somebody with cancer. I don't care who you are. And most kids, if you say, do you know somebody who has cancer, they all raise their hand. It doesn't matter the age. They know what cancer is. A lot of kids also know what osteoporosis is. They know what Parkinson's is. They know what a lot of these things are. And there's no better way than to make a lot of the science we do personal to them than by explaining it in a way that they think of somebody they know, perhaps themselves. So then you say, okay, great, that works really well for the life sciences and looking at cellular structure or pharmacology, but what about some of the other things? Well, you can still make them understand a story. So we worked on an experiment called MIX, microgravity investigation into cement solidification. And it was really just looking at how does cement form in space, right? So if I tell somebody what MIX stands for, that means nothing to them. But if I say, look, if you were trying to live on the moon, how would we build our house? Okay? You just got to break it down. That's all it is. And so I found that by telling a good story like that, people really do listen. And I had a lot of people come up to me after talks and say, I had no idea that so much of what you did up there mattered down here. And I said, that's my biggest point. It's not some big self-licking ice cream cone. And I talk about that a lot too. We're not just doing science for space science. We're doing science for you. But you got to tell that story. And if you think you're not the right one to tell that story, that's okay. Find somebody who is. Because it matters. It matters to people who fund organizations, fund projects, and it matters to those who are thinking about going into this field. So that's been my biggest point from the beginning, and I'm so glad I was up there with Alex, and he took such an interest in documenting it the way he did. He was so good with the camera in getting those images.
So leaning on that idea of telling a story a little bit more, you mentioned in your one clip looking at the cells and feeling really engaged in the work. So we often have to approach astronauts not just as subjects, but as operators, as technicians. And we've run into various, opinions, whether they want to participate or not. And I think talking to our group who really interacts with the astronauts, it's like, I think we have to tell them a compelling story too, when that science comes forward in these consent briefings, or when you're going to be a technician and the training happens. It can seem, I think, very either mechanical or rote, and just do this procedure and don't worry about, what it is you're really doing. So you want to talk a little bit more about actually being more part of the science and having an interactive role in it that I think could engage you more, which improves the quality of the experience for you and improves the quality of the output for both the science, the data, and the scientists, and therefore the story you can tell with it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So when I sat through my informed consent briefing, and I was there with 3 of my crewmates, none of whom I eventually ended up flying with because we all ended up getting shuffled around. As each experiment would come up, the PI is generally not present in the room. They're generally briefing us from afar. What we're saying to each other, what you can't hear behind the muted microphone, is what gap does this cover? What are we trying to solve here? And do we think this is important? They're paying attention, but it has to matter to them. And it, not even personally, but they have to feel like, okay, we are progressing area X or area Y, or we're progressing in spaceflight. And to be honest, there were some experiments that were described where I thought, wow, clinically I'm having a great difficulty trying to see the significance here. And I would question again, or David St. Jacques, who's also a physician, would ask again, hey, how is this helping us get to the moon? How is this helping us get to Mars? And if that question couldn't be answered, there's an issue there. And I'm just being honest. I want you all to know this is how they think when they're listening to everybody pitch their science. And granted, some of the science is going to be an indirect benefit. Be able to explain that, though. Because I'll tell you what does happen. On orbit, when we are doing these things, when we're done for the day performing our science and we're eating, we're talking about what we did. Everybody wants to know, hey, what did you do in the glove box? You were in there for 4 hours today. Hey, what were you doing over there? Talk about it. We love talking about it. And these aren't all physicians. I flew with a geophysicist, 2 geophysicists, a teacher, myself, and then, of course, Sergei was a cosmonaut. He wanted a test pilot. He wanted to hear about all of it. The Russians would come down from their side of the station and say, look at what we're doing down here. So it's not, people aren't doing the science individually. It is definitely a team approach. And so we know if we start to run over on your science because the procedure takes a little longer or we had a complication, we're more vested in your science, and we'll get it done. We'll take that time. We'll take that hit because we know how important it is.
So I think we all can really appreciate the honesty and candidness because, we have a lot of processes or procedures which serve their purpose, continue to serve a purpose, but we've evolved the way science is being done, with ISS and utilization phase, the complexity of it, the quantity of it. I think we have to think about evolving our approach both to the crew and how we explain the science. And really, this week, a lot of it has been an emphasis on we need to understand from you the application, like even if it is a couple degrees away, but your vision for how it's applied, hearing that relevance, it can be a very compelling factor. The other part that you mentioned, again, going back to eating together, socializing, interacting, sharing stories, that camaraderie, I think the folks would really appreciate hearing a little bit more about those dynamics and the complexity, because we heard a very interesting talk from Dr. Julie Robinson on the first day about using ISS as a Mars analog. And it definitely has its limitations, as Dr. Robinson was showing you when you compare and contrast, whether it be volume, number of crew, habitable volume, access to resources, that in a lot of ways ISS isn't going to function unless we manipulate it. But from your perspective, how do you see using the current state and how much we can extrapolate and maybe the tolerance for change, because there's always a tension there that could enable us to use ISS as a potential exploration test bed more effectively?
I think the majority of crew would be completely bought in if we were able to tell, the right story about why we're doing the science that we're doing. So, for example, if we're looking at changing an exercise protocol, or, people are going to say, look, we've been doing ARED and CVIS and T2 for years and it's worked well. Why would I stop doing that? And the reason being is we're not going to have ARED and T2 and CVIS on the way to Mars. We're just not. So how do we best set up our exercise protocols for those who are headed out there? It could come down to even the food system as well. We have an extensive food system on ISS that we're probably not going to have on our way out there. ISS, we are so well supplied, even in the medical realm. We're spoiled, and we're just not going to have that as we push further and further out. The better reasoning you give somebody to take a look at something, the more they're willing to look at it. And I will say that certainly with the newest classes coming in, so they've only grown up in the core with station, right? Shuttle was a very different time frame, a very different story. There was a lot of science being performed, but they were, constructing ISS. It was a totally different mission perspective. And station, because we would talk about it, I was lucky to fly with Ricky and Drew, who had flown on Shuttle, and they were able to give me their perspective about how different it is. And for them, it was a period of adjustment, knowing that this was the long haul, 6 months out. Why is this science important? Why are we doing this? What are folks going to do on the way towards Mars? And we thought about how we'd handle these issues. And so for us, one of the biggest things was being as autonomous as possible, because we knew that autonomy was going to come up in any sort of exploration class mission. So could you, and I know we've looked at this before, inputting time delays when communicating with ISS, unless of course it was an emergency. Scaling down how we support maintenance tasks, how we perform science even. I was a little spoiled. I used to ask the PI to talk me through and walk me through every step of the science because it was faster for me. I didn't want to read the procedure. It may be that we begin incorporating different ways of doing the science knowing we're not going to have that support from the ground. So the crew is generally very well bought in, but they need to hear the reasoning ahead of time and explanation. And so once that began to occur, and it actually went a lot better towards the end of our increment with that, where we were getting updates on what science we were even being performing and how this might translate down the road to Moon and Mars, people were fully vested. So, and very positive about it.
So I'm going to pull on the autonomy one in particular, because we do have some plans for some quick starts, because there are ways you can kind of, it's always crawl, walk, run kind of approach. Like, let's get some aspects of it involved, troubleshoot it, see how we can integrate it more, and how much fidelity does it really have. But autonomy is one of the areas, and of course, given being a physician astronaut, and the medical and performance perspective the Human Research Program has, your perspective on the ability to execute medical care autonomously at this point, and kind of your vision of where we need to go with it to be capable to provide the kind of medical care that we think will be needed in the future.
Yeah, so I think it was interesting. Granted, we have our flight surgeons on the ground, and they provide us support at any hour of the day, but do we do things autonomously by ourselves up there for medical issues? Yep, all the time. It's a crew of 6, and sometimes we just handle things on our own. That being said, as we push out, let's say towards Mars, I have a feeling we're going to have some sort of physician on that flight, so that will help to a degree. But how do you help in clinical decision making? How do you help when you have no one to pull on for any sort of telemedicine support? Or, let's say you have ultrasound as a diagnostic modality. Do you rely on some sort of virtual reality tool, or sort of AI assistance with that? I think all those platforms are potentially extremely useful. No matter what physician you have going on that trip, you can't train them for everything. And the other problem is maintaining currency. So let's say everything's great, 6 to 9 months there, let's say a year surface stay, and then 3 months of the way back, something happens. How do you maintain the currency of that physician? So we're going to have to find ways to do that, again, with AI, artificially, onboard training. The biggest thing that comes to mind is, again, I think ultrasound will be one of our only diagnostic modalities because we can use such a small platform to help with that. Do we have software tools, algorithms that can be used to help that person? Let's say they're doing a scan on the kidney to look for a stone or evidence of a stone, which could potentially happen on an exploration class mission. But they're not sure what they're seeing. Is there an algorithm, something that can be used to help that clinical decision making? So it's kind of scary for me to think about it. I mean, how terrifying to be really by yourself all the way out there, no kidding, on the pointy tip of the spear, having to make these decisions that could impact you the remainder of your journey. But we have that assistance out there, and it's being developed right now.
So I'm going to ask Serena one more question, but if anybody in the audience, we got some microphones out there, so as soon as people start approaching, we can definitely have her answer your questions. Thinking about kind of where we're going with lunar next, well, commercial space first.
Yeah. Soon, maybe.
Soon, soonish. Lunar, the Artemis Gateway, and always being Mars forward. There's lots of discussion, particularly with commercial space, about flying the non-NASA astronauts, or whatever terminology. I probably used the wrong one.
Maybe payload scientists.
Payload scientists.
Yeah.
But people who, given we have a current certification paradigm, and you say, is there latitude to consider expanding that paradigm a little bit, and how to get our arms around kind of that risk posture, and where the lines of clinical medicine can take us versus research has to start to backfill some of the evidence to even determine risk posture. Just give us a sense of kind of just your position on it. It's going to be hard to have an absolute stance, but the kind of the position of the global effort of commercializing space and more people flying.
I think it's very possible. I mean, the administrators already talked about these, maybe 30-day private astronaut missions, and what I envision are payload scientists coming from various companies or academia, or someone sent up there to complete the science to a very high level of fidelity that maybe we can't do up there. So it does open up the realm when it comes to science. It continues utilization of station. Well, now that you're opening it up, you're right. So now we've got folks that maybe aren't as highly trained or stressed, meaning, we're put in a lot of uncomfortable situations in our training for Space Station and Soyuz, and that's for a purpose. That's to make sure that when things go wrong or we're running through emergency scenarios, we've been in those uncomfortable places before. The first time you panic, you don't want that to be when you're docking a Dragon, right? So there's a reason NASA trains the way it does and the Russians train the way they do. So how do we incorporate that into these folks who are maybe only coming up for 30 days or with new underlying medical conditions? I think companies like Virgin Galactic may help with that. They're going to begin flying a lot of these people that aren't the healthiest people in the world, and we're going to get some data from there. So I'm hoping we get to utilize that. But I think it's overall a very positive thing. When I heard the administrator talk about it, I thought, why not? We need as many science hands up there as we can get. It does increase the risk to a degree, but I'd love to be able to continue station in that regard if that's one of the main ways we can do it.
So the part of what you said was about the way you train, the way NASA astronauts, cosmonauts are trained because of the mission requirements, and that could be offloaded for someone like a payload specialist. But for exploration missions, an MOD, FOD, Flight Operations Directorate, their motto is train like you fly. So for exploration missions, we're trying to get our arms around kind of what does that even really mean. So we often put forward ground analogs as a better resource to really understand some of what we believe to be the most stressful, or the areas that we think would cause stressors that we have yet to really understand. And there was a discussion the other day, and it's come up about black swan. The I don't know what I don't know, and in retrospect, I should have caught this, but I wasn't looking at the data the right way. So maybe your thoughts on the idea of taking current astronauts, putting them in ground analogs that are at extensive durations or under stressors that we think are much more exploration-like versus what we do on ISS. Is that even kind of an area of consideration?
No, absolutely. So we do use a lot of analogs now, but you're right, not for as long. So for example, our NEMO missions, but those are only about 14 to 17 days. Antarctica, I still argue, is one of the best analogs we have out there. I was there for about 2.5 months, so 2 months on the ice, which is a good duration, not as long as an exploration class, but you can hash out a lot of issues over 2 months as to what you might need to support yourself behaviorally for missions longer than that, 6, 9 months, a year, 3 years. So I think pulling current astronauts and putting them in those postures and in those situations is a great idea. They may not want to do it at first. No one wants to train exactly like you fly, because that's a lot. You're like, why would I want to be away from my family for 6 months before I even leave, But I think every astronaut you talk to, at least those who have been in some of those analog environments, tremendously appreciate the insight it gives, and they can't argue against it. So are there other analogs out there that we haven't looked at that we might potentially be able to use for some of this besides Antarctica or being under the sea? That's what I'd love to be able to talk with people about, because I think there are. So,
Thank you. So we have a gentleman over here, got to the microphone first. We'll take your question.
Hi, Serena. You talked a little bit about the science that you're doing or did on ISS and how that science is preparing us for Mars. Once we actually go to Mars and the crew is on that vehicle for that outbound cruise, that's going to be among the longest microgravity flights in human history. Forget about the surface part. What do you think would be the types of science that we should do during the outbound cruise on the way to Mars and the return cruise coming back to Earth?
so that's 45 questions in one. I'm just kidding. That was great. So certainly looking at the science we do now on station, I think some of the most important science we do is the stuff we're doing right now on every astronaut on board, the human science that we do. So looking at bone density, for example. Sometimes I hear people say we've solved that problem. Not sure I buy that, because even with our current countermeasures, we still see bone loss. A tremendous decline in bone loss. It does depend, it highly varies on the crew member itself. But that being said, we've got a lot of work that we need to do, especially in the area of pharmaceuticals. Do we put somebody on a pharmaceutical agent that may hang out in the bone for a long period of time? What does that do to them long term? What does that do to the trabecular network of that bone long term? So that's one of the main things I look at. I think bone loss is one of our biggest things. Obviously, space radiation is a big one. We're trying to figure out the impact of certainly the radiation we experience in low Earth orbit on the human at a cellular level and up to an organ level. What is it? We don't know. It's hard. It's one of the hardest things ever to mimic on the ground and simulate on the ground. Behavioral issues, I still think, are in our top 5, okay? So I tell people frequently that the folks I flew with on my mission, I think we had such a successful mission with many issues that occurred, including a hole in our Soyuz, allegations that the crew did it from the ground, and a Soyuz abort, and not knowing when the next crew was going to get up there. We made it through all of that because of the good self-care and team care techniques that we learned. And we applied every day without fail. And it has to be an active effort. So as you're sending somebody out to Mars, you're still going to be studying the human, because we're going to have to launch into the void, into the unknown, to a certain degree. We cannot be sure of everything before we go. We're just going to have to go and learn along the way. But I think the basis for the science that we're doing now, we absolutely continue that, and behavioral becomes an even more important component. Because I tell you, as that Earth gets smaller and smaller, and you're less able to talk with your family and your friends, which is a huge part of my behavioral support system on orbit, that's going to go away. And people can tell you how they think they'd react to that, but they don't really know until they have to. So, thanks for the question.
We're going to go over to this microphone.
Serena, I really appreciated your comments of how you learned from Ricky, the experiences of the shuttle, but also how you sort of forced yourself into looking at ways that you might be able to approximate what it's like without communication in the future. I always know that if I have to fix something, I probably learn it better if I read the book, but I'd much rather have somebody tell me how to do it and just go faster. Are there any plans to formally challenge, now that you're the pro, the experienced one that's flown, to challenge those newer astronauts to say, when you're up there, look for opportunities to do exactly that kind of thing of not go with the quick, easy way, but the way that it might be as we go beyond?
Yeah, I think so. The problem that comes up with that is that red line. And y'all know what that red line is on our timeline? It measures our day by 5-minute increments. And the moment you wake up, that red line's moving. The moment I start eating breakfast, it's moving. Morning DPC, our morning daily planning conference, we're watching that red line tick away. And the program wants a certain number of hours of science and everything else that needs to be completed that week. So it is a race. You are chasing that red line. And a year before I flew, Joe Acaba came to me and said, man, that red line gets tiring. It's fatiguing every day. And so in order to try and accomplish some of those things, John, to be able to give people the freedom to do that, we need to give them that freedom on their timeline. Because otherwise, let me tell you, every astronaut that's up there wants to do the best job they can and complete the tasks without mistake, without failure. They never ever want to mess up on someone's science. But our days are blocked back to back to back. And if let's say by some chance you get done with a task 30 minutes early, you're expected to go to the task list, which is about 50 items. And these are things that the program hopes you get done at some point. So that's just the reality of our timeline on orbit. There is very little wiggle room. I'd love to have more of it so that they could challenge themselves. But I think what we're going to have to do to accomplish that is make it a part of the procedure and just force the entire program to look at that. And they have. I know they've talked about trying to do, again, some sort of time delay on orbit itself and, maybe back off some of the support when it comes to a maintenance task. Because I can tell them that in their head all they want, but I'm going to tell you how it is up there. It is go, 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 go. We've got to get the science done. We've got to get things done. Don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. Just my 2 cents.
And I think it would require like a little more comprehensive shift in the whole approach, which has been discussed, but it's like turning the Titanic. I'm going to stay over here for a second. This line is getting longer than that line. Can I have one more over here?
Hi. Serena, we had the wonderful opportunity to have that video downlink with you at Texas A&M towards the end of your flight last year. And I wonder if you would mind sharing with the audience here, if you can remember it, your answer to a question my postdoc posed to you. What's the most important piece of equipment, medical equipment, or resource for an exploration mission? Do you remember that?
I think I said myself.
Yeah, you pointed to yourself.
I did that.
Right.
Yes, the human.
Yes.
Because I don't care how good your algorithms are. They can assist. But for the physicians in the room who understand what it's like when sometimes you have to go off of gut instinct about what's going on and what's wrong and to what degree and to what organ systems may be failing and how to best treat somebody and when to back off that treatment and when to say something doesn't seem right. And let me tell you, that has saved me more times than not in the hospital. And it's just a feeling. It's what I call my spidey sense. When my spidey sense goes off, something's wrong. Someone's not doing well. So I can never take the human out of exploration because of that. Because we make decisions that are so non-data based. It's just, and I think everybody in this room understands that. So.
I think there have been some studies that have shown like your gut actually, or that intuition is a supercomputer working.
Yep.
Right? And you have taken in data on a subconscious level you can't even account for. So you're integrating more than you ever thought you were, but you don't have the
we just haven't figured
you
it
don't
out
have
yet.
the bits and bytes to show it.
Yeah.
We're going to go over this mic over here.
Thank you for that amazing talk and for sharing your experience with us. The moment you shared with the candlelit dinner that you had was particularly sweet, and I think the question I have may be too great, but I think maybe one of the things that we need now as a society, as a people on Earth, how do we build a family like that? How do you sustain family under such pressure?
Well, family for us on orbit, it was almost natural because we were so separated from everything. It didn't matter which country you were from, there was a natural inclination to gather. And I think that's been there since the dawn of the age of the human, to gather, and especially around fire. So we couldn't have fire because they'd really get upset at us for that. So we made our own. And what you couldn't tell from that video was the music we had playing. And a question I've gotten asked is, what did you not expect up there? And honestly, one of the biggest things was how important the impact of music was on ISS. It is such a sterile environment with humming and whizzing, and you hear the avionics, and every module has its own sound. So we knew immediately when the toilet was about to break, because the way the motor would spin down, we could detect that change. But it was just mechanical. And ISS is full of life, but the moment you add music, and we all had little portable Bluetooth speakers and our own music list, so whatever module you were working in, you could take your music with you. So I'd go from one module and hear Led Zeppelin, to Mozart in the lab, to Alex's terrible German techno music in the Note 1, to anything, but it made it so full of life, it felt more human. So we were able to discover those things up there. And I think, honestly, wherever we go as a species, we'll make family. That's inherent. So I don't worry about it at all.
Silvano Colombano from NASA Ames. I was really happy to hear you talk about autonomous medical operations, your ultrasound wand, and kidney stones in particular. We are working precisely on that problem with deep learning, artificial intelligence. My question is, what would the software, in your opinion, have to do or not do to make you increase the comfort with it? Or in general, what would make you trusted?
That's what I'm trying to get you to figure out. So for me, I'm not terribly well versed. I'll be honest, I'm an internist. I've done a little bit of ultrasound, but not nearly as much as maybe some of my emergency medicine colleagues, where they utilize that a lot more. So for me, the way I learn ultrasound is images. Show me what image you want, and a shot knows this. I'd say, a shot, what image do you want? And I will match that image. Now then, once I match the image, let's say I'm looking at the kidney or I'm looking at the ureter. Now how can I tell if something's wrong? So I need some sort of way for, I don't know, an algorithm just to light up or highlight an area that says, hey, we're detecting hydronephrosis here. We're detecting that something's dilated, something's not right, or a hyper intense signal maybe indicating a stone. But it's got to be readily apparent, so that if you combine that with, hey, I'm having flank pain, and I see some blood in my urine, or I detect it on a urine dipstick, and I'm having a little bit of nausea, then this whole story's tied together. That algorithm can't give you the whole story. It's not going to give you 100% certainty. It's always tied in with the clinical picture, and hence the importance of the human in that game. But the easier you can make it, you know, we can only do so much training, and I think a lot of people assume that if we do send a physician to Mars, they're going to have all this time to train on medical procedures, and I do not think that's going to be the case at all. So assume minimal training, or training on the fly. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, now you can go figure it out. Okay.
I'll go figure it out.
Placed your order.
Yeah.
Bonnie.
Well, thank you very much for your comments, and it's really enlightening for me to hear what's been happening and watching what's been happening on board the space station for the last 20 years. My last flight was in 1998, and so I was part of the shuttle from the first flight, 1981, until 98. So I saw that part of the shuttle that I think, you know, it's one of those old sayings about those who forget the lessons of history. I flew on 3 Space Lab flights, and I'm wondering how much of our lessons learned from those lab flights that we flew, which we intentionally tried to pathfind for space station, actually reached you. And there's actually 3 things I can point out. First of all, in 1985, when we only had 1 TDRS up, I didn't have a lot of air to ground. We did a lot of autonomous work on the station, or on the space lab, and we had 2 countries involved, the US and Germany. So there's a lot of autonomy we had in trying to achieve, we needed to achieve. The other is that we always timelined a crew member to film, because we didn't have all the TV downlinks. We had good old 16 millimeter, which is hard to convert now, and 35 millimeter. So in those days, we had a lot of documentation on the research, which is still archived. And the other is that we also had what we call below the lines, or maybe you call it above the lines science, you know, the things that we would do if we had time to do, that we were actually trained on. And I know that training has to be a little bit thinner these days, but when we spent time in labs, more time, I think, in labs, training with the researchers, that we could help be part of that investigation team. But all those lessons learned were captured, and I wonder if you get debriefed on them at any time and what we can pass over now to station.
Bonnie, thank you so much for those comments. Sadly, a lot of those lessons are not passed on, and I think it's, you know, we've gotten spoiled with station, because as we're able to increase capability, TDRS satellite, whether it's comm or direct communication with the ground. Now my PIs are watching my science while I'm performing it. I get real-time updates and feedback, and that's not what y'all had back during the Space Lab days. And so I think you're right. We've forgotten our history, and we've forgotten the lessons we did learn from back then. Interestingly, we call it, so I call it Don Pettit Saturday morning science. Our office calls it voluntary science. So this is science a crew member might want to do on their own time. And a lot of us did take part in that. So for me, it was filming short videos like you saw, drawing liquid out of a vial. You know, how did the properties change? How difficult was that? Don Pettit, of course, actually just published a paper in Nature Microgravity about some of the science he's done on orbit, and he was the king of that. Ricky spent a lot of his time filming stuff for the Challenger Foundation and filmed a lot of videos looking at physics and how you could demonstrate the laws of physics on orbit, because it's easy when you don't have gravity, or easier. And so I think that passion is still there, and people are doing it. We don't get much time on the ground or any sort of training. In fact, I think our basic science training has really gotten cut down so much that I feel like we're doing a little bit of a disservice. And I'll give you one example, very specific. When I did work on AngieX, which was a lot of cell biology, I would have loved a 1-hour lecture on the cell again, and the organelles and the podocytes and things like that, because that is what the PI was having me look at, very specific cellular structures. And so then I think it's absolutely warranted for these experiments that are going to be up there for weeks at a time. So we've cut back on a lot of that because there's so much training on every module of the space station and the emergency procedures and things that will no kidding save your life. 80% of the science we get when we get up there. So, but thank you for bringing that up, because it's very true. What you all had to live with when you perform science during shuttle is nothing like what we deal with now. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to mention briefly that the challenge we have is not only the technology, but getting access to astronauts to tell us whether it's working or not for them. So I just point that out in general.
Do you mean challenge of setting up an experiment, or while it's on orbit?
Getting feedback, getting access to astronauts, either on space station or in analogs, whatever. We just need that to be able to advance the technology. And that's not appreciated enough. Every time we ask you, so why do you need them? You know, it's just the screen, it's simple. Why do we, you know, but it's very important for people like you to say, I know I need the alarm here. I don't see it right. It's not working for me. It's really crucial. So I point that out, that's all.
Yeah, and so I think we're trying to do a better job nowadays. When we do perform a lot of this science on orbit, we have the video link live real time with the PI, and I go back and forth with if something's not working, I'll be like, look, we need to fix it. We're losing time here. Here's a suggestion. So that's one thing I do tell a lot of researchers, is if a crew member makes a suggestion to your science, it's usually not to affect your science. It's to say, hey, let me change the positioning. I know you think the microscope should be here, but if we do it this way, it's much more efficient. Trust us on that. We've been up there so long, we know how to operate in that environment. But I really, honestly, I guess I didn't anticipate how much I would communicate with my PIs on orbit. And I was pleasantly surprised, because I thought it helped me perform better science.
Great, thanks.
Hello. So you were speaking a little bit about some of the secondary items that you might have to help things feel more like a home, or help gather around, like the fake flame that you created, or the speakers that you would carry around. These are all kind of non-integrated items within the environment, to a very sterile environment of the ship itself. How important do you believe it is to think from an integrated approach of the ship itself to bring in that capability of creating home-like atmospheres or environments that help to tap into that need that you're obviously trying to grasp for as a group?
It's very important. So when we turn over station to a new crew coming up, in fact, Alex and I made this a main point of our debrief. You are turning over certainly the current state of the union of station, every system, the science, how to perform the science, how to test the water, how to clean the toilet, right? Those are the day-to-day activities. And then there are the intangibles. And we talked about this to the very uppermost people of the program, about how important it was to give us time, because we had 17 days to turn over station to David, Anne McLean, and Oleg, which sounds like a lot of time. It is not. because they're having to do a lot of procedures together with us to learn them for the first time, the most important procedures, working with EVA suits. We needed time to show them what it was like to gather as a family at the table. We needed time to show them what Saturday movie night was like and how to get the screen out and how to set it up, because we did that every Saturday night. And that was an important thing for the crew. About all the special little things that we did. So I think each crew does try to do that. What we wrestle with the program is time to do that, because sometimes you just don't have a whole lot of time in there to turn over a station, and we want to make sure we share those intangible aspects. So we think they're very important.
Hi, Serena. So you mentioned lessons learned. Yesterday, JD talked about the importance of learning from our history. Is there anything from your experience that you've thought, we really need to talk about this, but no one's asked me yet?
So I do get it. I kind of stress a number of times, you've heard me say it today, about how much self-care and team care mattered during our mission, and how it made a mission with several stressful events that occurred. It made it much more feasible to be handled by the crew and for us to come out all still as friends. And the thing I don't get asked a lot is, can you give us an example of that? And honestly, it's the simplest thing in the world. It's actually things like saying please and thank you. And what do I mean by that? So when we take out the trash on station, we don't really take it out. It gets put in the PMM, which is where we do our hygiene. Not pleasant, but anyway. When the trash is taken out, it has to be sealed up a very certain way in certain bags so that we don't have those odors escaping. It's about a 10-minute evolution. No one's assigned to do that. It's whoever kind of puts the last piece in. They could either shove that piece in and wait for the next person, like you do at home, or just take out the trash. All right? Just do it, people. But everybody's in a hurry. It's the red line, always chasing that red line. So when I would see somebody doing that, or someone else would see me doing it, we'd say, thank you so much for doing that. That small acknowledgement means everything. Everything. It sounds so simple, but it is something that continues to propel a very good feeling between the crew on orbit for a long period of time. Because the moment you begin to feel like you're not appreciated and people don't care, ooh, morale goes down quick. The other thing, and I'll use Ricky Arnold as an example because he had the best line. He said, you know, someday when you finished your work for the day and you finished 10 minutes early, I mean, that is a victory. And you are tired and you've put up all your tools and nothing got lost, and all you want to do is just go back to your crew quarters and call your family. He goes, your buddy is going to be eating a he didn't say poop, a poop sandwich up there, right? Trying to get their work done. And you're just going to have to go over and help and offer to put their tools away and offer to help them finish and say, what can I do? Can I heat up something for dinner for you? Those small acts make all the difference in even just a 6-month mission. And we were so conscious of that our entire time we were up there. We talked about it. We talked about what made this crew special. And it was those. It was nothing earth-shattering. So thank you for letting me answer that.
I have a question. It's not particularly scientific question, but when you're with your colleagues and you're living and you're working aboard the ISS, can you comment to what extent music impacts what you do?
So music, so we'd always have it on at dinner, and it was just based on the mood of the crew. And we'd say, Alex usually picked it, and we'd give him all of our iPods, and he'd say, what do you feel like? And we'd try like Adele, which we usually never listen to very much. I like Adele, but it was never really an Adele night for the crew. So we'd love to listen. We'd listen to movie soundtracks. And it just depended on how the day went, how stressful of a day it was, how much we needed to wind down. But we loved, because we would eat and then just sit in silence. So we don't have cell phones up there. We had our iPads. And I think people feared that once we got access to the internet, people would just isolate themselves off and be on their iPad. We weren't. We would just spend time with each other. And sometimes that just means floating in silence and listening to music. I enjoyed listening to NPR in the mornings. I enjoyed listening to a local radio station out of Washington, D.C. because a lot of my family's there. And if I listened to their weather and I listened to things that were happening, I felt more connected to them.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Serena, thank you for these exciting insights. When Scott Kelly returned to Earth from his 12-month mission, he had really a hard time to readjust to Earth's gravity and the environment. According to him and his partner, it was like 6 to 8 months, much longer than after a 6-month mission. So I would be interested, how long do you think it took you to get back to feeling normal after your mission?
Yeah, good question. So I will, without disclosing anything, I will say that it highly matters how much you take part in the rehabilitation program that is offered for you at Johnson Space Center when you return from space. There's a very structured rehab program that we're in for 2 hours a day, every day for about 45 to 60 days. So that matters. For me, the biggest issue I had upon landing was neurovestibular, no question. So when we landed, we stuck the landing. It was upright, very violent jolt, but then everything was still. And I'm sitting in my seat, and I know SAR is coming, and we have about 10 minutes, because the Russians are fast. And I remember sitting in my seat, and I thought to myself, for all these years, I've heard about how bad this is. Let's see what happens. So I slowly turned my head to the right. Man, was that a bad idea. Everything started to tumble. So I slowly moved my head back to the center, and I kept it there. And I said, getting out of this vehicle is going to be hard, mostly for neurovestibular. I could pull myself to the center seat. I could assist. I mean, they have to lift you up, especially when you're coming out the top hatch. But the moment it was so provocative, getting jiggled even a little bit like this, coming out, you just start throwing up everywhere. That's just, that is spaceflight, okay? You're throwing up everywhere, you're dry heaving. The Russians are prepared, they have bags for you, right? So finally, I'm sitting on the edge of the hatch, still trying to throw up. And after about a minute, it finally stopped. And then that's when the Russians turned you around to the cameras, and you guys see the smile on the faces, right? Yeah, it's all fake, it's all fake. And then I was fine, you know, when they lifted me down, and I could actually track things very well. But maintaining that balance was the toughest part. So for me, neurovestibular, by far worst when we first landed. That took about, for the big parts to go away, 3 to 4 days. And rehabbing helps with that. So the more you're forced to move in a 1G environment and stand on one leg or squat down or make your legs move in differing angles, that helps. I call it reprogramming. So someone's asked me, what do you think is happening? And I'm like, these neural networks are waking up because they've been asleep, and now they're being overstimulated and are frantically reprogramming to gravity. They've seen it before, so it doesn't take long. But there was a drill I was doing with my flight surgeon where I was walking down the gym floor, and he asked me to put one foot, not heel to toe, but just swing one foot out and bring the other foot in. And at first, I was really unsteady. But by the middle of the gym floor, my body, my brain woke up. And he looks at me, he goes, oh my God, it's like Kaiser Soze. He goes, that was amazing. And it was amazing for me to watch the brain, to watch those neural networks suddenly, I don't know what they're doing, reconnecting, waking up, call it what you will, but they were alive again. And so I will say that also, I feel like your joints fundamentally change. So sure, you lose bone density, I get that. But your joints change. There's not the same stretch, there's not the same load. And for me, that's taken well over 6 months, 6 to 9 months to kind of feel normal running again. Where I got injured very easily at first. And it's getting better. So it's different with every crew member. Some people tell you they feel normal in 2 weeks. I don't buy that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be our last question.
Thank you so much. So as a public figure in space, and for all of us who are scientists and physicians in that community, what do you think is your responsibility and all of our responsibilities to the people of Earth?
So I think my responsibility to you guys is to be as honest as I can when I answer your questions. right? I don't sugarcoat things. I mean, and granted, this is one person, so I try not to make you feel like my way or the highway. This is the experience of one person. But if you ask me, you know, how could I best improve this? How could I best improve operations on orbit? How do I best improve communication to the crew? I'm going to give you my best, most honest answer. And sometimes you don't always get that, right? Because sometimes people are, you know, they're going to answer the way the program wants them to answer. Or, you know, and sure, I care about that, but I care on improving the science. So for me, that's what I see as one of my biggest tasks. When I come to a conference like this, which I love, because I see all my friends, right? All my friends, all my colleagues, this is great. I'm going to try and help you as much as I can. And I may not be able to, but I'll give you that honest answer. What your job is, like what I mentioned before, is when you get out of this society where we all know what we're talking about, understand that the person walking down that sidewalk doesn't. But I bet you they'd be interested if you talk to them about it. So put yourselves, so I give a lot of talks. Get yourselves out there and do as many talks as you can and tell your story. You'd be surprised who wants to listen. And don't think it has to be to an academic audience. Go to schools, go to elementary schools, go to middle schools. You can adapt your story for any age, but you gotta put yourself out there. And I know we're all busy, but take the time to do that. You'd be surprised what reach you can have and how quickly.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Serena.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like the audience, myself, we truly appreciate your honesty and your candidness. You're a pretty credible individual, so I think we're going to take your input for sure. Some really interesting insights. A true resource going forward, given your job representing the crew office and exploration forums, and back to the HRP community, the larger research community, and then back to the crew office, because we're also trying to close the loop with communication and emphasize how we speak to each other, how we provide, the rationale and the compelling story behind what we're trying to accomplish, so that people recognize what's significant about it, what the impacts could be and should be. We had a great panel yesterday with interagency and looking at what they're trying to accomplish in a lot of ways, not very different, and we have all the potential in the world to solve these problems, not just for Earth, but for space and bidirectionally. So we need to take advantage of those and let people know that's what's going on. So truly appreciate you taking the time to be here. We know you do have a busy schedule, and to make us a priority is pretty special. And thank you for all of you for staying.
Yeah, thank you.
We do have awards coming up next. So we're going to recognize some poster competition winners, some grant augmentation winners, and have a few closing remarks. So thank you. So the first set of awards we're going to be announcing are for the graduate student poster competition. In third place is Courtney Patterson from University of Waterloo. Do we have Courtney in the audience? Second place is Grace Wusk from Virginia Tech. And we actually have, for the graduate student posters, 3 posters tying for first place. We're going to start. Congratulations to Jacob Kintz from University of Colorado Boulder. Next one is Fahim Ershad from University of Houston. And Pratesh, should have practiced this, Mila Bathula from University of Arizona. I appreciate the enthusiasm. Look at all this energy after 4 days. The next set of awards are for the postdoctoral poster competition. For third place, we actually have a tie for third place, Catherine Rahill, University of Central Florida. Also in third place is Vivek Mann from Texas Southern University. Second place, Jasmine Devidad Hassan, University of Arizona College of Medicine, Phoenix. And first place, Vivekanand Vimal, Brandeis University. Come on up, sir. Congratulations. The next category is we had grant augmentations before when we opened up both registration and abstracts. And we did this last year. For PIs that had existing grants, we offered the opportunity to have other people collaborate with them for student augmentations, because this was a way to kind of really get other people a little bit of funding, another student or postdoc, a little additional work. And the big bang went back to us because we could leverage off of some existing science. So we're going to announce them in alphabetical order, and we do have a certificate for the grant augmentations. The first one is Amin Mahari, working with John Lawler. Amin. And the title is Attenuation of Space Radiation-Induced Pro-Oxidant and Fibrotic Signaling in the Heart by Nutritional and Genetic Interventions, Adventures in Tissue Sharing. Second grant augmentation, Ashley Blackwell, working with Rich Britton, Impact of Combined Space Radiation Exposure and Sleep Perturbation on Fine Motor Control. Next we have Brennan and Antone, working with No Share Contractor, Polaris, Prescriptions Optimally Learned Assessing Risk in Space. It was good practice of the use of acronyms. We have to acknowledge that at NASA. Heather McGregor. Oh, we do have Brennan. Come on up. Congratulations. Heather McGregor, working with Rachel Seidler, are spaceflight-associated intracranial fluid shifts linked to SONS. Nilofor is this is terrible. Azadina, working with Leslie Dechurch, measuring and predicting performance for individuals, teams, and systems in independent crew task. Next we have Peter Klein, working with Ivan Soltz, mechanisms underlying charged particle-induced disruptions of CNS function. Mitesh Lawala, working with Ashley Weaver, computational assessment of body kinematics and injury risks for astronauts in standing posture during lunar landing and launch versus a conventional seated posture. Brock Sisch, working with Michael Story, determining the role of estrogen on space radiation-induced lung cancer risk in female mice. Carla Franco, working with Cheryl Nickerson, RNA-seq profiling to identify molecular biosignatures associated with spaceflight analog-induced phenotypic changes in microbial pathogens. Federico Kiefer, working with Amelia Eisch, HC particle exposure-induced improvement of pattern separation in mature mice, alterations in mission-relevant behaviors and neural circuitry. We certainly appreciate all of the high-quality submissions. We did our best to be able to grant as many awards as possible. Look at Dr. Pulaski running away for closing comments. I think you might need to come back up the stairs, sir. We're going to close this meeting together. We're going to cross the finish of the marathon together. So, in my opinion, and we're going to find out from all of you, because this is really your meeting, and I know a lot of people had to take off. 4 days is a long time, but we got a lot to pack in, and we try to synthesize as much as possible. But there's surveys that go out, and we'd really like both your honest and candid opinions, just as we appreciated from Dr. Ahn, Chancellor, your thoughts on the meeting, things you liked, things you didn't. And if you didn't like something, we'd like you to offer up a solution. Oftentimes, we might be thinking in our box and we'd like to get out of it, and we would really like to have your input into what you'd like to see done differently. And if there's something that you liked and you really want to make sure it's here next year, make sure you give us that feedback, because we would like to continue to improve this meeting and increase the value back to both of us, you and the program and the agency and the Earth. I can't express any greater, deeper appreciation for the team that ends up putting this meeting together. There are so many people, and I cannot name them all. I mean, I literally cannot name them all. It goes deeper and deeper each time I learn about all the people that get pulled in to put it on. I have a new appreciation for the level of complexity to achieve a meeting of this magnitude. So without naming them all, I'd like to give the folks who help us with all the infrastructure a big round of applause for making this a success this year. I'd also like to thank Dr. Pulaski and Barbara Corbin, our deputy program managers, for the incredible amount of support that they give us to be able to host this meeting, and also the support that they give to be able to fund the work that goes on and drive the collaboration and the freedom to think about a different way of moving forward for HRP. How does HRP need to evolve to be responsive to the needs of the agency? So I'd like to give Barbara and Bill a round of applause. And lastly, it goes back to you. You made it. You're the last people standing, sitting. And you know what? It actually got warm in here. I was like, when? They must have shut off the AC about 20 minutes ago. So I'll know how to dress better next year. So we really have appreciated you being here. The energy was incredible. The participation in the meetings, in the sessions, the questions at the plenaries. I can't thank you enough, your attendance at the banquet and the support for our speaker. So I'd like to give you a round of applause for being here and sticking it out with us. We look forward to planning the next year's and the next multiple years worth of work. We're going through our budget planning as we speak. We had meetings today all over the place to make sure we understood each other and had a solid strategy going forward. But I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in 2021. Reaching another level of accomplishment with our data, see more integration, more collaboration, diversity of teams, finding disciplines that you never thought could have anything to do or anything to bear on your study. I really prioritize those characteristics when those proposals come in. Those are the types of things we're looking for. And again, how are you applying your findings? So I'd really appreciate the efforts that you make. want your feedback, and I look forward to making some progress and seeing you next year. I'm going to hand the podium over to Dr. Pulaski to see if he'd like to share any words of wisdom.
Thank you, Jen. This whole show has been Jen's show. That's why I started to walk away. Jen and her team pulled this together. This is all her idea. The structure of the conference, the way that we're integrated together, it all comes down to Jen and her science team. I'm really happy that this is the first year in 3 years that we're able all to be here, and that we actually got to make it all the way through a meeting without being furloughed. And I was really, really impressed by all the sessions that I saw. I spent a lot of time watching the TRIS sessions because this is the first time that TRIS scientists come forward. And you know, TRIS was set up as a kind of a skunk works organization to work outside of the normal patterns of what we do, looking for novel ways to do the business. And maybe while the standard program is sort of taking small steps, we ask them to take giant leaps in the science and the technology that we need to get to Mars. And I really was impressed by the work that I saw across the board in the TRIS-sponsored activities. And the enthusiasm and energy in the hallway between sessions and at lunchtime was just amazing. It's the best meeting that I've seen since I've been here. And we started these meetings when HRP started, but we had an earlier version of these that went back into the 90s, and I went to most of those meetings over all the years. And this is the most vibrant, and I think we're coming together as a larger team, understanding that the agency needs us, that the missions to Mars, the most critical system is going to be the human system, that we will not, that the rocket scientists won't get to Mars without the work of the people in this room. The highest up people at NASA headquarters understand that. That's why they give us the priority that they do. Congress understands that. That's why they're thinking about increasing our budget for the coming year. And I really appreciate everybody who comes and stays throughout this whole meeting. And I really appreciate the camaraderie that I've seen and the way we're coming together. So I want to take my hat off, if I were wearing a hat, to Jen and to her team. And especially, I think, Jen didn't want to call out people. I'll call out one, and that's Manish Arya, who was standing up on the stage a few minutes ago. Manish has worked behind the scenes very quiet. He makes everything happen that Jen doesn't have time to make happen. So, I think Manish really deserves a round of applause from everybody. And at that, I'm gonna say that that's probably the end of the meeting. I hope you all go off and have a wonderful year of science, and that you can come back and tell us about the new things that you've discovered and the way that you're moving the whole program forward and moving us all a step closer to putting humans on Mars in the next decade and a half. So have a good year.